My name is Martha Lane. I'm 61. And I learned at my own dinner table that love without respect turns a home into a ledger. The candles were already burned low, the roast was cooling, and the people I'd fed for years were avoiding my eyes as if they were hot coals. Claire, my daughter-in-law, lifted her glass and smiled like a headline she'd written herself. Some people just live off others, don't they, Martha? Her words landed softly, a feather with a needle hidden inside. Daniel stared at his plate. My grandson asked for more mashed potatoes, oblivious to the current moving under the tablecloth. I set my napkin down and reached for my wine. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt something inside me go quiet, the way a lake stills before it mirrors the sky. "If that's how you feel," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a woman who had done the counting for a very long time, "then I suppose the Leech will stop paying your mortgage next month." The knife of silence that followed was clean. The candles hissed in their own pools of wax. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, as if it had heard a window slam. Claire's face flickered, mocking, then puzzled, then afraid. Daniel's chair scraped the floor, a flat, unmusical note. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand. I just lifted my glass to keep my hand from shaking and tasted the bitter fruit of a truth that had been ripening for years. "Excuse me," I said. And I stood then, not to shout, not to plead, but to leave. The hallway smelled faintly of furniture polish and whatever we used to call forgiveness. I closed the door behind me as gently as I could, and the latch clicked like a period at the end of a long sentence. And that is how the reckoning began. The driveway lights carved 2 yellow triangles across the asphalt as I walked toward my car. The night air felt heavier than usual, wet with spring and silence. When I slid behind the wheel, I kept my hands on the steering wheel longer than I should have, staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the windshield. I didn't look furious. I looked emptied. After Walter died, that hollow became the space Daniel tried to fill. "Mom, come live nearby," he said on the phone. His voice trembled with good intentions. I told him I would think about it, but truthfully, I had already packed my boxes before hanging up. Grief makes you want to keep someone alive by helping what they left behind. Daniel was all I had left of Walter, the same sandy hair, the same habit of biting his lip when he worried. Claire met me on the porch the day I arrived. She was wearing one of those linen aprons with her name embroidered on it, Claire's Petals. Her hug was polite, not warm, and I told myself that was just nerves. She was trying to make something of her flower business, selling arrangements online, storing boxes in every corner of their townhouse. "It's not much now," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "But one day I'll have a real storefront." I smiled and told her it would happen sooner than she thought. I meant it. Back then, I still believed that hard work and kindness could bridge any gap. When their car broke down that first winter, I covered the repairs. When Daniel's hours were cut at the dealership, I paid the mortgage just for this month. It felt good to be needed. Walter used to say I had an accountant's heart. Steady, predictable, a little too generous. I liked numbers because they didn't lie. People, though, they can rearrange truth as easily as furniture. Claire's flower shop dream came to life 2 years later. On the corner of Maple and 3rd, I wrote a check for the deposit. It wasn't enormous money, about $15,000, but it was enough to make the bank say yes. The smell of the place when we opened it together still lives in my memory. Eucalyptus, cardboard, and the sweet rot of lilies left too long in buckets. I was proud. I thought Walter would have been proud too. At first, Claire thanked me every chance she got. She called me her angel investor, a term that made me laugh. She brought me coffee when I dropped by, showed me receipts, talked about floral trends like a CEO pitching her board. I even helped with her bookkeeping some evenings, entering invoices while she clipped stems and hummed. I never asked for repayment. I just wanted her to see me as part of their success. But gratitude ages quickly when people grow comfortable. As business picked up, so did Claire's confidence and her spending. A new espresso machine appeared in the shop's back room. Then a gold necklace she said was a gift to herself for surviving the first quarter. Daniel bragged that the business was finally turning a profit. I smiled but noticed the past due bills folded neatly inside the cash register. Then came the big storm. A supplier went bankrupt, and one of her main wedding clients canceled after paying only the deposit. Claire called me that night in tears. "It's over, Martha. We'll have to close." The sound of her crying made me grab my checkbook before she even asked. $72,000 left my account the next morning. It wasn't impulsive. I drew up an agreement with her and Daniel. 60% ownership until repayment. Signed, notarized, stamped. I told myself it was just a precaution. Deep down, I knew it was protection. For a while, things improved. She texted me updates, photos of brides, baby showers, anniversary bouquets. "You saved us." One message read, "Couldn't have done it without you." Those words warmed me better than coffee ever could. But seasons turn. Success has a way of editing history. By the next spring, her social media page was full of photos. Claire at trade shows, Claire behind the wheel of a new SUV, Claire sipping wine with my amazing team. Not once did she mention Daniel or me. One afternoon, I stopped by the shop with cookies. Claire was rearranging tulips, her phone tucked under her chin. "Just move the meeting to Friday," she said into the receiver before glancing up at me. Her eyes flicked to the cookies, then back to the flowers. "You didn't have to bring those?" "I wanted to," I said, setting them down. "How's business?" "Busy. Too busy to keep explaining numbers," she replied lightly. "Daniel doesn't really get it. And, well, it's none of your concern." "Martha." The words hit harder than she knew. None of your concern. After all the co-signing, all the zeros that carried my name, suddenly my concern had expired. That night, I sat at my dining table with the accordion file I'd used my entire career. Each envelope held a chapter: mortgage supplements, tuition checks, tax receipts, the business loan. I spread them out like cards in a game I never meant to play. Together they told a story that ended with a single truth. I'd financed their lives while losing mine. Outside, the street lamp cast its thin orange glow through the blinds. I stared at the neat columns of numbers until they blurred into gray lines. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet switch flipped. I realized I wasn't their safety net anymore. I was their foundation, and they were building higher on my silence. When I finally crawled into bed, the sheets smelled faintly of starch and sleep aid tablets. I dreamed of Walter standing in a field of lilies, looking disappointed but not surprised. The next morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to taste like resolve. On the counter, the folder waited, organized, labeled undeniable. I poured the coffee, sat down, and began writing notes in the margin of the agreement. The pen moved slowly at first, then with certainty. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was clarity. By the time the sun lifted over the houses across the street, I knew what I had to do. The years I called help by its first name were over. From now on, help would have boundaries, and so would I. I started with dates because dates don't lie. They sit there, neat and absolute, waiting for you to face them. The day I co-signed the mortgage, the day I first helped with their bills, the day $72,000 vanished from my account to save the flower shop. Each one marked a small surrender disguised as love. I placed every paper in a clean folder, bank statements, emails, the ownership agreement with my signature side by side with Claire's. Then I made a copy and tucked it into the safe behind my linen closet. I'd told Daniel where that safe was once, when he was little, and thought every locked door held treasure. "It's just where Mom keeps things safe," I had said. I smiled at the irony as I closed the steel door again for a few days. I tried to act as if nothing had changed. I still sent birthday cards to my grandson, still baked bread for the Sunday dinner, but the air in that house had turned thin. When I arrived with a casserole, Claire was on the phone, her tone syrupy. "No, we're fine, Mom," she said to her own mother, glancing at me as if I were a house guest who'd overstayed. I left the casserole on the counter and drove home without saying goodbye. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom, Claire's upset," he began. His voice sounded like it did when he was a boy caught between two truths. "You embarrassed her last week. Couldn't we just talk about it calmly?" "I've been calm for years," I said. "I've been calm while signing checks, calm while co-signing loans, calm while being erased. Maybe calm isn't what we need anymore." There was silence on the line, then a sigh that sounded like surrender. "She's scared you'll take the business away." "She's the one who made it legal," I replied. "She signed those papers. Daniel, I only followed through." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth was starting to sound like thunder, even when whispered. The next week, an envelope arrived from a law firm in downtown Wakefield. I knew before opening it that it wasn't good news. Claire had hired an attorney to renegotiate my ownership stake. The offer was insulting. $1 for my 60%. $1 for the money that had kept her dream alive. I set the paper down on my kitchen table and laughed, a short, humorless sound. I poured coffee and thought of Walter again. He'd worked 35 years as an insurance adjuster, a man who lived by fine print. I imagined what he'd say if he could see me now. "You kept the receipts, didn't you? Marth?" "Yes." "Walter." I did. Every single one. I drove to my lawyer's office the next morning, a modest place above a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and yeast. His name was Alan Burke, an old colleague of Walter's. When I walked in, he greeted me like family. "You've been busy," he said, flipping through the folder I handed him. "Not busy," I said. "Just finished." He scanned the agreement, the bank transfers, the text messages. He raised his eyebrows. "This is airtight. They can't touch you." "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I just want distance." "Then distance is what you'll get," he said. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. That night, the phone rang again. Daniel's name glowed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But old habits die slower than trust. "Mom, Claire's freaking out," he said. "She says you're going to ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm enforcing what's already true." "Can't we work something out? She's under pressure, loans, suppliers, everything." "Daniel," I said quietly, "pressure doesn't excuse cruelty, and I can't fix something by bleeding more for it." He didn't answer. I heard him exhale, a sound that belonged to a boy who'd once called me Mommy. "You're really doing this?" he asked finally. "I am," I said, "because if I don't, you'll never stop thinking I'll always say yes." When the call ended, I set the phone down and stared out the window. My neighbor's porch light glowed across the street, steady and kind. I realized that peace doesn't come when everyone understands you. It comes when you stop apologizing for being understood. Days passed. I heard nothing from them. Then one afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store and saw Claire in the parking lot. She was loading boxes of artificial flowers into the SUV I'd once helped her lease. When she saw me, she froze. "Martha," she said carefully, as if my name were an animal she didn't want to startle. Claire. I nodded. Her eyes darted away. We didn't mean for things to get ugly. I just thought maybe you could... I can't, I said gently. Not this time. Something flickered across her face, anger first, then something smaller, something like fear. She nodded once, sharply, and drove off. When I got home, I found another letter waiting on the kitchen counter, a notice of intent to sue, claiming I'd exploited emotional dependency. My lawyer called it desperate. Don't worry, he said. This will collapse in court. Still, it hurt. I'd spent years feeding that family, both literally and otherwise. Now I was the villain in their version of events. I sat at the table where I used to fold napkins for Sunday dinners and felt the weight of every meal, every holiday, every gentle silence that had once filled this house. But alongside the ache was something else, something solid, like a new spine forming where my old one had bent too long. I realized boundaries aren't walls to keep love out. They're fences that show where respect begins. When Alan called the following week with the court date, I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about finally drawing a line I could stand behind. As I hung up, I noticed the folder still sitting on the counter. I ran my hand over the smooth cover. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like closure. Outside, the first leaves of autumn had begun to curl. The air smelled of rain and endings. I poured myself a glass of water, lifted it like a quiet toast, and whispered, to the line I should have drawn sooner. And for the first time in years, the house felt still, not empty. The courthouse in Wakefield wasn't grand, just a brick building with dull windows that reflected a gray February sky. I parked my old sedan 2 blocks away and walked slowly, the cold biting at my hands even through my gloves. I remember thinking that it was almost funny, how many times I'd driven here to pay property taxes for them. Yet this was the first time I came for myself. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and coffee. My lawyer, Alan, met me near the metal detector, holding 2 folders. You ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, I said. We sat in a small civil courtroom, just a handful of pew-style benches and a single clock ticking above the flag. Claire was already there with her attorney, wearing a dark blazer that didn't suit her. Daniel sat beside her, eyes on the floor, twisting his wedding ring like it could rewind the last few months. When he finally looked up at me, I saw confusion, guilt maybe, but not cruelty. Claire didn't look at me at all. The judge entered, a woman about my age with hair cropped short and expression neutral. She asked for opening statements, and Claire's lawyer stood, his tone slick and confident. He spoke about emotional manipulation, elderly influence, coerced signatures. I could almost hear the story they'd built, a lonely widow taking advantage of her son's wife for control. I sat very still, my palms open on my lap. Then it was Alan's turn. He didn't raise his voice, didn't perform. He simply opened the folder and placed each document on the podium one by one. The signed ownership agreement, the bank transfers, the notarized letter, the text messages where Claire had written, "You saved my shop." The sound of paper against wood was the loudest thing in the room. Alan looked at the judge. My client has kept these records not out of malice, but because she's spent her life keeping numbers straight. There's nothing coerced about gratitude. For a long moment, the only noise was the ticking clock. The judge glanced through the documents, turning each page carefully. Then she sighed, a small, tired sound. "Mrs. Lane," she said, looking at me directly, "you've kept excellent records. There's no evidence of exploitation here. The agreement stands. Case dismissed." Just like that. No gavel slammed dramatically, no gasps from the crowd, just a few murmurs as chairs scraped the floor. Claire's lawyer said something to her under his breath, but she didn't answer. Her shoulders stiffened. I stood slowly. My knees trembled, not from fear, but from release. Alan squeezed my arm and whispered, "It's over." But of course, it wasn't. Not really. Things like this don't end in a courtroom. They end in the quiet afterward. Outside. The air felt raw and bright. Claire and Daniel walked a few steps ahead of me down the courthouse steps. When Claire finally turned, her face was pale, her voice brittle. "You destroyed us," she said. I shook my head. "No, Claire. I just stopped building for you." Daniel's eyes flicked between us, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might speak. Instead, he followed her to the car. The taillights flashed red as they pulled away, disappearing into the gray. I stood there for a while, watching the exhaust dissolve into nothing. A woman passing by dropped her keys, and I bent down to pick them up for her. It felt strange to move my body again, to be part of the world outside of this war. That night, I didn't celebrate. I poured tea, not wine. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock I'd bought with Walter on our 10th anniversary. I walked into the guest room, where the spare bed was neatly made, and sat down. The relief was real, but it was heavy too, like taking off armor and realizing how much you'd been carrying. I checked my phone before bed, no messages, just silence. I put it face down on the nightstand. Sleep didn't come quickly. My mind replayed the judge's words, the scrape of chairs, the flicker of Claire's eyes. I didn't feel triumph. I felt space, wide and unfamiliar, but mine. In the morning, sunlight crept through the blinds and cut across the bedspread. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching a pair of sparrows bicker on the fence. For a moment, I wondered if Claire would ever see this as mercy, that by drawing a line, I'd given her a chance to learn where decency begins. Maybe not. Maybe people only learn after the dust settles. When I opened my front door to get the mail, the wind carried the smell of rain and something sweet from a neighbor's chimney. I thought of the flowers in Claire's shop. What would happen to them now? Who would water them? Who would close the blinds at night? Then I thought of the garden behind my house, neglected all winter, and how the soil there was waiting. I folded the court notice and placed it in the same accordion file, right where the story had begun. Then I wrote on a sticky note, "Done." And I meant it. Spring arrived slowly that year, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath. I spent my mornings in the backyard, clearing weeds and turning soil that hadn't felt my hands in years. Each time the shovel broke the ground, I felt something loosen inside me too. I planted the leftover pots from petal and pine, the ones I'd bought at auction after the shop closed. Hydrangeas, lavender, and a single stubborn rosebush that refused to bloom until late May. I talked to them sometimes, half joking, half prayer. "We made it," I'd say, even if we had to start over. Daniel texted once in early June. "Mom, we miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. The ache was still there, but softer now, like a bruise fading. I typed back, "Maybe someday, when words come with truth." Then I put the phone away and went back outside. The sun was warm on my shoulders. Bees hovered above the lavender, busy and unbothered. For the first time in years, I didn't feel needed. I felt whole. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat on the porch, and opened my old accounting notebook. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Assets, peace, honesty, freedom, liabilities, none." Then I closed the book and smiled. I used to keep everyone else's balance sheets. Now, finally, I've balanced my own.